Abandoned and chained mom with 7 newborn puppies. Look who came to their rescue. The wind howled through the abandoned alleyway, rattling broken glass and scattered debris. Amidst the cold, unforgiving night, a frail mother dog lay curled up against a rusted metal pole. A thick, rusted chain clamped tightly around her neck, its links digging into her matted fur. Her ribs pressed against her thin coat, each breath a struggle. Hunger gnawed at her insides, but she remained motionless, conserving what little energy she had left for them. Beneath her trembling body, 7 tiny newborn puppies squirmed, their fragile forms nestled against her belly. Their eyes were still shut, their pink noses twitching as they whimpered softly, searching blindly for warmth and milk. But their mother had nothing left to give. She was exhausted, dehydrated, and starving. Yet, even in her weakest state, she refused to give up. Every few moments, she lifted her tired head, ears twitching at the distant sounds of the city. Honking cars, distant voices, the occasional bark of stray dogs. Was help coming? Or was she to remain forgotten, bound in chains, watching her babies slowly fade away? The alley was a place of abandonment and decay, its walls smeared with graffiti, trash scattered across the ground. Piles of discarded cardboard and shattered bottles lined the edges, offering no shelter from the biting cold. The scent of rotting food mixed with the sharp sting of gasoline, filling the air with an unbearable stench. Above, the sky was dark and heavy, thick clouds swallowing any trace of the moonlight. A distant rumble of thunder echoed through the city, signaling an approaching storm. The first drops of rain began to fall, cold and merciless, landing on the mother dog's back. She shuddered but did not move. Her body shielded her puppies from the elements. She was their only shelter, their only protection in a world that had already abandoned them. With each passing second, the rain grew heavier, soaking the ground into a chilling mess of mud and filth. The dampness clung to the mother's fur, making her tremble even more. Yet, no matter how cold or hungry she was, she did not shift an inch. She had no choice. She was chained, trapped in this nightmare. The puppies, just days old, were completely unaware of the dire situation they were in. Their tiny bodies barely had the strength to move, yet they wriggled helplessly, trying to press closer to their mother's warmth. Their stomachs were empty, their cries weak but persistent. One of the smallest puppies let out a desperate whimper, its little body shivering uncontrollably. It nudged against its mother's belly, searching for nourishment that simply wasn't there. The mother let out a soft, mournful whine, nudging the tiny pup closer, as if to comfort it. She licked its head gently, her tongue moving slowly, weakly. The only thing she could offer now was her love. With rain pouring harder, the little ones began to tremble. Their fur, still thin and delicate, was no match for the cold. They needed warmth. They needed food. They needed help. But would help ever come? Or was this how their story would end? Forgotten, alone, and fading beneath the storm? Elena walked down the quiet street, her boots splashing in the shallow puddles left by the evening rain. She pulled her coat tighter around herself, trying to block out the cold wind. It was just another night, until she heard it. A faint, desperate whimper cut through the silence. She stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding. It was the kind of sound she couldn't ignore. She turned her head, trying to figure out where it was coming from. The alley to her left was dark and empty, except for a few scattered trash bins. Carefully, she stepped forward, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The smell of damp fur and rotting garbage filled the air, making her stomach twist. As she moved deeper into the alley, the cries became clearer. Then her light landed on something that made her gasp. There, against a rusted metal pole, lay a frail mother dog. Her body was soaked from the rain, her fur dirty and matted. A thick, heavy chain was wrapped tightly around her neck, locking her in place. She was too weak to fight it, too exhausted to even lift her head properly. But the most heartbreaking sight was the tiny puppies curled up against her belly. 7 newborns, no more than a few days old, huddled close to their mother, their tiny bodies shivering from the cold. Their eyes were still closed, their movements weak. They cried softly, their little voices barely loud enough to be heard over the sound of raindrops hitting the ground. Elena's breath caught in her throat. Her emotions hit all at once. Shock, sadness, and anger. How could someone do this? How could anyone abandon a mother and her helpless babies like this, chained up, left to starve in the cold? It was unthinkable. She felt an overwhelming urge to help, but she knew she had to be careful. Elena slowly crouched down, keeping her movements gentle. She didn't want to scare the mother dog. "Hey, sweetheart. It's okay," she whispered. "I won't hurt you." The mother dog lifted her head weakly, her dull eyes meeting Elena's. There was fear in them, but also something else, a tiny flicker of hope. She had likely given up on being rescued, but now, for the first time in a long time, she saw someone looking at her with kindness instead of cruelty. Elena quickly took in their condition. The mother was in bad shape. Her ribs were visible through her thin fur, a sign that she hadn't eaten in days. The chain was so tight around her neck that it had left deep marks on her skin. Her body trembled, not just from the cold but from exhaustion. The puppies were in an even more dangerous state. Their little bodies were wet, and they didn't have the strength to cry for much longer. Some of them barely moved at all. They needed warmth, food, and medical attention, fast. If Elena didn't act quickly, they might not make it through the night. But there was another problem. The mother dog might not trust her. Even though she was weak, her protective instincts were still strong. If she thought Elena was a threat to her babies, she could growl, snap, or refuse to let her get close. And if Elena startled her, she could hurt herself even more by pulling against the chain. Reaching into her bag, Elena pulled out a small packet of wet dog food, something she always carried for strays. She tore it open and let the smell drift toward the mother dog. The dog's nose twitched, her muscles tensing. She looked at the food, then at Elena, as if trying to decide whether it was a trick. Elena carefully placed the food a few feet away and stepped back. "It's okay, Mama. You can eat," she said softly. She held her breath, watching. Would the mother dog trust her? Would she allow herself to be saved? The rain was falling harder now, making the puppies shiver even more. Elena knew she had no time to waste. If she didn't find a way to help them soon, it might be too late. Elena stayed as still as possible, watching the mother dog's reaction. The rain dripped from her coat, but she barely noticed. All that mattered was getting this little family to safety. The mother dog sniffed the air. Her tired eyes locked onto the small pile of wet food in front of her. Hunger and exhaustion fought against her fear. She hesitated, torn between instinct and desperation. Elena knew she had to be patient. Sudden movements might startle the dog, making her retreat further into fear and defensiveness. She kept her voice soft, gentle, comforting. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now. You don't have to be afraid." She slowly extended her hand, palm up, showing she meant no harm. The mother dog's ears flicked. She was watching Elena closely, trying to decide whether this stranger could be trusted. Her muscles remained tense, but there was no growl, a good sign. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she cautiously stretched her neck forward and took a small, shaky bite of the food. Relief flooded through Elena. This was a breakthrough. The mother dog was starving, too weak to resist much longer. She licked up the food hungrily, her body trembling from both exhaustion and the effort of eating. It was clear she had gone days without a proper meal. Elena stayed quiet, giving the mother time to eat. But as much as this moment mattered, she knew the real challenge was still ahead. Now that the mother dog was focused on eating, Elena moved her flashlight toward the chain. Her heart sank. It was rusted, thick, and wound tightly around the metal pole. Someone had secured it cruelly, ensuring the dog had almost no movement. There was no collar, just the chain pressing against her neck, leaving behind irritated, raw skin. Elena reached forward slowly, testing the chain. It was heavy and unyielding. She tried to loosen it, but it wouldn't budge. She needed cutters, something strong enough to break the rusted metal. She bit her lip, If she left now, even for a few minutes, the mother might panic and withdraw her trust. Worse, the rain was getting heavier, soaking the puppies more. They wouldn't last much longer in this freezing weather. She dug into her bag, hoping for something, anything that could help. A small multi-tool. Not strong enough to cut, but maybe enough to pry the links loose. Taking a deep breath, she reached toward the chain, working carefully so she wouldn't scare the mother dog. The moment Elena touched the chain, the mother dog's body stiffened. Fear flashed in her eyes. Her ears pinned back, and for the first time, a low, warning growl rumbled from her throat. She wasn't attacking, she was warning. Elena froze. This was the mother's ultimate test. She had trusted Elena enough to eat the food, but letting her touch the chain was different. It meant surrendering control. It meant trusting a human who, for all she knew, might hurt her or take her babies away. Elena kept her voice calm, her hands steady. "It's okay, Mama. I know you're scared, but I'm here to help." The mother dog looked at her puppies, then back at Elena. She was torn. She wanted to protect them, but she was also too weak to keep fighting. Her breathing was shallow, her body trembling harder. If she resisted too much, she would only hurt herself more. A long, tense moment passed. Then, just as Elena thought the mother might snap at her, the growl faded. The dog exhaled, her body sagging slightly. She turned her head away, not a sign of aggression, but of reluctant surrender. Elena felt a lump in her throat. This mother had been through so much pain, but she was still choosing to trust. It was the most heartbreaking, beautiful moment she had ever witnessed. Now she had to act fast. This family didn't have much time left. Elena barely had a moment to breathe before the situation took a dangerous turn. The wind howled through the abandoned lot, rattling loose tin sheets and sending a chill through the air. The light drizzle had turned into a relentless downpour, soaking the ground into thick, sticky mud. Visibility was fading fast as the evening sky darkened into an ominous shade of gray. She glanced around, her gut twisting. Something felt off. A distant rustling in the overgrown bushes made her skin crawl. Was it just the wind, or something else? She couldn't afford to take chances. Stray dogs often roamed this part of town, and some could be aggressive, especially if they sensed food or weakness. Worse, there were rumors of coyotes in the area. A low, eerie growl confirmed her fears. Her flashlight beam flickered as she swung it toward the noise. Two pairs of glowing eyes reflected back at her. Stray dogs, thin, hungry, and watching her every move. They lingered just beyond the reach of her light, their postures tense, predatory. Elena's heart pounded. She had to move fast. The mother dog was in no condition to fight, and the puppies, so small, so fragile, would be defenseless if these strays decided to attack. She slowly shifted, trying not to show fear. "Not tonight," she murmured under her breath. She wouldn't let these animals become another tragedy. She turned her attention back to the puppies. They were worse off than she had thought. Some were shivering uncontrollably, their tiny bodies struggling to generate warmth in the freezing rain. One wasn't even moving. Elena's chest tightened. Was it too late? She placed a trembling hand on the smallest one, feeling for any sign of life. A weak, barely their breath brushed against her palm. Still alive, but barely. The others weren't much better. Their fur was soaked, their bellies too empty to provide any real strength. One puppy whimpered softly, pressing against its mother's legs, seeking warmth that the poor dog could barely provide. Elena knew that if she didn't get them out of here within minutes, some of them wouldn't survive the night. But the mother was still trapped. That chain was the only thing standing between them and survival. Elena's fingers were ice cold, shaking as she fumbled with the multi-tool. The rusted chain was wound so tightly around the metal post that it barely budged, the corroded links refusing to give way. She grit her teeth. She needed more strength. Planting her feet firmly, she pulled harder, ignoring the way the metal cut into her fingers. The mother dog whined but didn't resist. She knew this was the moment. She was waiting for freedom. A loud snap. The chain didn't break, but one of the links loosened just enough. Elena pushed harder, forcing the metal apart with every ounce of strength she had. Suddenly, the tension gave way. The chain unraveled, falling away from the mother's neck. For a moment, there was silence. Then, like a dam breaking, everything happened at once. The mother dog staggered forward, as if she didn't believe she was finally free. She turned to look at Elena, confusion in her tired eyes, before letting out a deep, exhausted sigh. A sound of pure relief. Elena's heart clenched. She had done it, but it wasn't over yet. She scooped up as many puppies as she could, wrapping them carefully in her jacket for warmth. The mother dog, despite her weakness, didn't hesitate. She followed Elena, stepping into her new life of freedom. But just as they turned toward safety, the growling behind them grew louder. The stray dogs had stepped closer, sensing weakness, sensing hesitation. Elena knew one thing. This family was not safe yet. As the final piece of the rusted chain fell away, the mother dog remained frozen in place. The storm had left her soaked, her thin body trembling from cold and exhaustion. Her ribs stuck out painfully beneath her matted fur, and her legs looked unsteady as if they might give out at any moment. Her eyes, dark and weary, flickered between the humans standing before her and the tiny bodies of her puppies curled up beside her. She had been abandoned, mistreated, and left to fend for herself with no reason to trust anyone. But something in the way the rescuer moved, slowly, carefully, without force, made her hesitate. For a long, breathless moment, she did nothing. Then her nose twitched, sensing the warmth of the hand extended toward her. Her body tensed as if debating whether to flee, but her legs remained locked in place. She was exhausted, too weak to run, but more than that, something deep inside her wanted to believe she was finally safe. With a cautious, almost trembling step, she moved forward, not away, but toward the rescuer. There was no wagging tail, no joyful response, only a silent acceptance. It was a small moment, but in that moment, trust was born. The wind howled around them, the rain continued to pour, and in the distance, the sound of stray dogs barking echoed through the empty lot. The rescuer knew there was no time to waste. Carefully, she reached into her bag and pulled out a thick blanket, spreading it across the wet ground. The puppies were still huddled together, barely moving, their tiny bodies cold to the touch. Their cries had weakened, their hunger and exposure draining their strength. One by one, she picked them up, wrapping them securely in the blanket, tucking them against her chest where they could feel warmth again. The mother dog let out a soft, worried whimper, her body stiffening as she watched. "It's okay," the rescuer whispered, her voice steady and reassuring. "I promise I won't hurt them." The mother didn't try to stop her. Instead, she stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the small bundle of puppies now safely cradled in the rescuer's arms. She wanted to believe this person wouldn't take them away, wouldn't harm them like others had in the past. But she was still afraid. Her tired body swayed slightly, her paws sinking into the wet ground as if deciding whether she had the strength to walk. The rescuer knelt beside her, speaking gently, offering her hand once more. The mother flinched but didn't pull away this time. Her nose, cold and damp, pressed against the rescuer's palm. A silent surrender. She was too weak to walk on her own. The rescuer knew there was no choice but to carry her. With great care, she lifted the frail dog into her arms, expecting resistance, but instead, she felt the mother's weight collapse against her chest. She wasn't just weak. She was exhausted. Her body trembled slightly, her muscles tight from stress, but she didn't fight. Instead, she allowed herself to be held. For the first time in what must have been weeks, someone was carrying her, not out of cruelty, not to harm, but to protect. The car ride back to the rescue shelter was quiet except for the sound of the rain against the windows and the occasional soft whimper from the puppies. The mother dog remained curled in the rescuer's lap, her body still tense but no longer shaking. The warmth of the car's heater began to dry her fur, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't sitting in the cold, drenched and shivering. The puppies, still wrapped in the thick blanket, stirred faintly, their tiny breaths growing steadier as the warmth returned to their fragile bodies. By the time they reached the shelter, the mother dog had relaxed just slightly. The rescuer carefully carried her inside, guiding her to a soft, dry bed lined with fresh blankets. As soon as she was placed down, she let out a deep, heavy sigh, not one of fear, but of relief. She curled protectively around her puppies as soon as they were placed beside her, licking their tiny heads, nudging them closer as if making sure they were all still there. And then, something incredible happened. For the first time, the mother dog, who had spent so long chained, abandoned, and left to suffer, made a small, almost hesitant movement. Her tail wagged. It was faint, barely noticeable, but it was there. A single, hopeful sign that she understood. She was finally safe. The moment they arrived at the rescue center, a team of veterinarians and volunteers rushed to help. The mother dog, still weak and weary, lay curled around her puppies, refusing to leave their side. The vet approached with gentle hands, speaking in a soft, reassuring voice. First, the puppies were examined, tiny, fragile, and cold to the touch. They were dehydrated and underweight, their little bellies empty from days without proper nourishment. Some whimpered softly, while others barely had the strength to move. The mother dog watched every movement with wary eyes, her breathing slow and steady. She flinched when the vet reached toward her, but exhaustion kept her from resisting. The team quickly assessed her condition. Severely malnourished, covered in dirt, with wounds on her paws from struggling against the rusted chain. She had given everything to keep her puppies alive, sacrificing her own strength so they could have a chance. Warm blankets, hydration, and nutritious food were provided immediately. A volunteer sat beside her, whispering comforting words as she was given 4 fluids to replenish her body. The puppies were carefully placed in an incubator, where they could regain warmth and receive the nourishment they desperately needed. The rescue team worked tirelessly, determined to bring them back from the brink. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, a remarkable change took place. The mother dog, who had once been too weak to stand, slowly regained her strength. Her once dull eyes began to sparkle with life, and her frail body filled out with proper nutrition. At first, she ate cautiously, as if unsure when her next meal would come, but as trust grew, so did her appetite. The puppies, once fragile and helpless, began to thrive under the care of the rescue team. Their tiny bodies grew stronger, their once weak cries turning into playful yips. They learned to wobble on their little paws, stumbling around their mother, who now watched over them with renewed energy. She no longer flinched when humans approached. Instead, she allowed them to pet her, even leaning into their touch, a silent thank you for saving her family. One day, as a volunteer approached with a bowl of fresh food, something incredible happened. The mother dog, now full of life, wagged her tail. Not just a small, hesitant movement, but a full, happy wag. It was as if she finally understood. She was safe, loved, and no longer alone. As the puppies grew stronger, the rescue center began searching for the perfect homes. One by one, families came forward, eager to give them the love they had never known. Each adoption was bittersweet. Watching them leave the shelter was difficult, but knowing they would be cherished made it all worthwhile. But what about the mother? The rescuer who had found her, the one who had freed her from the chains and carried her to safety, couldn't forget her. Every visit to the shelter only deepened their bond. She had seen the mother at her lowest, had watched her transformation, and now, she couldn't imagine letting her go. And so, in a heartwarming turn of fate, the mother dog found her forever home, not with a stranger, but with the very person who had saved her. When she walked out of the shelter that day, she didn't look back in fear. She looked ahead, tail wagging, eyes bright, stepping into a future filled with love. She had been abandoned, chained, and left to suffer, but now she was home. The transformation was nothing short of a miracle. The mother dog, who had once been weak, starving, and chained to a cruel fate, was now unrecognizable. Gone were the days of fear and suffering. In their place was a dog full of life, her once dull coat now shining with health, her eyes filled with gratitude and trust. Her puppies, who had once shivered against her frail body, unsure if they would survive another night, were now playful, energetic, and thriving in their new homes. The contrast was stark. The rusted chains had been replaced by a soft, warm bed. The hunger pangs were gone, replaced by full bellies and excited tail wags. Instead of the hopeless whimpers that once echoed in the silence, the air was now filled with joyful barks and playful yips. The mother, who had once fought desperately to protect her babies in the harshest conditions, could now rest peacefully, knowing they were safe. This story is more than just a rescue. It is a testament to the resilience of animals and the power of compassion. It shows how a single act of kindness can change lives, how love and care can heal even the deepest wounds. The mother dog had every reason to give up, but she held on for her puppies, proving the unbreakable strength of a mother's love. And in return, the world showed her that kindness still exists. But she is just one of many. Every day, animals are abandoned, mistreated, and left to suffer in silence. Yet, just like this mother dog and her puppies, they too can find hope, if only someone is willing to step forward and help. This story serves as a reminder that we all have the power to make a difference. If this rescue touched your heart, consider supporting your local animal shelters, donating to rescue organizations, or even opening your home to an animal in need. Every adoption, every act of kindness, every shared story spreads awareness and saves lives. Let this be more than just a story. Let it be an inspiration. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person to break the chains of suffering and offer an animal the life they deserve. And in return, they will give you something priceless: their trust, their love, and a bond that lasts forever.